some of them before, but every time I learn something new, so always
Yeah,
useful.
yeah, fascinating stuff. So, over to you, Al from IMED, to talk about a beginner's guide to regulatory pathways for medical devices. Uh, At
Okay.
the Innovation Challenge last year, when we opened up the competition, half of the applicants were in and around the med tech space. So I think this is going to be absolutely valuable for people. So thank you, Al. I think you're sharing yours, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm just about to share now. Oops.
So we've got about 20 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, on the wrong slide, of course, but there we
Of
go. Go
course.
back.
There we go.
That's inevitable, isn't it? So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Anne Mills. I'm Business Development Director at IMED. IMED's a team of 20 specialist medtech regulatory consultants. And I'm qualified to talk to you today in the sense of understanding the regulatory pathways. But because, of course, I'm in sales, I will say I know nothing. In fact, I understand the pathways, but I probably don't have any direct device experience. So I'm hoping if Sam asks me any questions, it won't be about a particular kind of crazy product. Um, so what we want to do today is we want to introduce you to what really innovators in the medtech space should be thinking about when they're developing their products. Obviously, they're very interested in the science and the product at the very beginning. And at some point, we've got to consider patients. And once you start to do that, you'll start to see that there's quite a lot of work and thought around risk, protecting the public, and proving that your product does what it says it's going to do. So today, as you can see from the agenda there, we're going to talk about regulatory planning. Obviously, Ed and Greg and Andy have all said about, early engagement. I'm afraid I'm going to be banging that drum as well, because actually the truth is that if you don't understand your regulatory pathway, it can hijack your commercial plans. So if you understand them at the start, you won't make a misstep. Um, we need to then consider how the design and development needs to happen to make sure that pathway is adhered to. We're going to talk to you about how you navigate that regulatory process, because there's fairly nuanced and specific requirements. And then, of course, once you've got your product to market, you still have to be a responsible manufacturer, and you still have to consider how to keep that safely on the market and consistent improvement too. So we're going to cover all those aspects today. Um, so in terms of kicking things off, medical devices and IVDs, that means in vitro diagnostics, for those of you that are not in this part of the industry, they are basically,
Hang on.
that's anything
Hang on out. Hang on out. What does in vitro mean?
in vitro. So it's basically in vitro in Latin, I think, is in cup. So I think what it
Yeah.
basically means is anything where you take a sample to be tested. So your lateral flow test that we've all been
Yeah.
done during COVID would count as being an IVD. Yeah, there's lots of Latin involved in medical, isn't there? So basically, the regulation is there to protect patients, make sure that the products do what they're supposed to do, that they don't harm anybody, that they minimize the risk to those patients who are using them, that they're an acceptable safety risk for the users as well as the patients, because it might also be clinicians that are using those. And how do we prove that? Well, we prove that by having a really good quality management system which controls the design and production of the product. We have documentary evidence to prove that we've met the regulatory requirements. And in some cases, particularly, the higher the risk, the more evidence you're going to need. You might have to do a clinical investigation, which obviously can be quite timely and complex. So who are the regulators? Well, government agencies really who decide what the regulations need to be. The Americans are going to win the prize for the snappiest title. We've all heard of the FDA. Obviously, the rest of us with our MHRA, much easier to just use the initials. But basically, each authority decides what those rules are, but they don't all actually do the conformity assessments themselves. Most of them operate on the basis of delegated authority, which they give to other certification organisations. I'm sure people have heard of people like BSI, SGS, and DECRA, and actually more and more coming online all the time because there's so many more devices and technology coming through that they need more and more people to be able to sign them off. So we'll talk about when they are needed and how they're used as we go through. So the starting point is to really define down your intended purpose. You'll hear regulatory people banging on about this all the time, but the truth is, if you've got a product, we need to understand what it is, what it does, how it works, who's going to use it, where will they be using it. If a clinician with expertise is using a product that they've used many, many times in a clinical setting, it's slightly different from Auntie Vi trying to sort out her wound dressing on her, lower limb ulcer or something like that for the very first time with a new kind of dressing. So we've got to really think about all of that. And obviously, if the clinical indications are multiple, then we need to ask ourselves, well, if we're using this for Parkinson's and we're using it for diabetes, what are the differences? And actually, is that two products or one? So we have to be really, really clear about this part. And it kind of doesn't matter how long you spend on all of this, getting that critical piece in place of understanding exactly what your product is, exactly what it's going to do, what you're going to claim it's going to do, because obviously anything that you claim, you're going to have to go ahead and prove. And also anything you claim in your marketing materials is potentially going to change the classification, the risk classification of your product. So you have to be really careful to make sure that you've really got that button down. You also need to think about what kind of patients are going to be using it. And also, which countries or markets do you think you want to sell the product in? And this is why, again, early engagement with people like IMED is really useful because the pathways are different depending on your product. And if you know up front which is going to be the least line of resistance, you might pick an unlikely market that you hadn't thought of because it's easier to get your product to market and get to income quicker by putting it on the market in that particular place. Once you've buttoned all that down and you're really clear, really got to move on to what's your regulatory strategy going to be. And this is where you want to make sure that it meets the same commercial strategy that you're doing. So no good planning on doing something next August if in fact it's going to take until the year after to get it approved. You need to have your eyes open on how long things are going to take and what needs to be done. So what regulations does your product need to meet? What level of regulatory risk is going to be associated with your particular product? What are your options? What pathways are open to you? What kind of technical information, regulatory documentation do you need to be able to prove it? And what other type of maybe clinical investigation or are there existing products on the market that are similar to your product and you'll be able to use their evidence, if you like, to show that your product is safe and efficacious? So once you develop your strategy, you've got to really be clear about which jurisdiction you're in. So in the UK at the moment, we have a different set of rules than Europe. When after Brexit, even though everybody in Europe was moving to a new medical device regulation, when we left Europe, we reverted back to some historical regulations which date back to 2002. Now, in the short term, that's actually given quite a few companies a really good window to get their products to market with a slightly lower level of benchmark to meet in terms of regulations. Um, in the EU, it's quite a tough market. You need lots and lots of evidence. And although the new UKCA mark rules will be released soon, we're expecting them to be in line with the EU. So probably quite a lot more evidence going to be required. So anybody who, particularly with a lower class device at the moment has got a really good opportunity to get to market in the UK with a bit less work to be done.
Just out of interest, Al,
Yes.
yeah, you may not be able to answer this, but if you want to sell into Europe, you'll need to get a CE mark, and in the future, if you want to sell into the UK mark, you need a CA mark. And obviously, the UK market, with all the difficulties with the NHS, and there's only 60 million of us against a different market and 360 million Europeans, might come to be better off chasing down the CE regulatory pathway just because of the larger market opportunity. I don't
Well,
know.
I think that there's a debate to have on that, because I think with Europe, although you've got your CE mark, if you then want to release your product, say in Italy, there's probably a few more hoops you have to jump through for Italy, maybe a few more for Germany. So
Okay.
it might not mean that you've met every single requirement. And what we are noticing from a lot of US companies is that they find it quite difficult to actually hit the EU, because they are selling to, a dozen different people to try and get their products into those markets. So, in a way, the idea of a single payer system with the NHS in the UK is actually quite appealing to them. And as I say, at the moment, we're quite a popular market because our rules are just slightly lower than what we'll require for the EU. At the moment, anybody with a CE mark who's outside the UK can also use their CE mark to place devices on the market. That will end at some point, but at the moment they can also do that. So what it means is if they've got a CE mark, they can give the UK a try without any extra expense at the moment as well.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting point that you make, but I think probably you're looking at several markets worth about the same as ours, with
Yeah.
the same amount of work to enter each one.
Okay. Yeah. But I suppose that also comes back to you need to understand who will pay for your medical device or product, isn't it? And how,
Correct, yes.
and what are the hurdles that just involving, you might have got the regulatory pathway sorted, but then what's the commercial pathway?
Exactly, because you might find that Germany looks a really good market for you, but the price point of similar products is £100 and you want to charge 250 to make it
Yeah.
work, then that's not a market for you. So
Yeah.
yeah, there are lots of other considerations to consider. Um, Yeah, so I think once you've, if you've spent a bit of time with a company like ours, we'd be able to tell you this is the kind of pathway in the EU, this is the kind of pathway in the US, this kind of pathway in the UK. Where are your connections? Where do you think is most likely you're going to sell it? We try and combine all of those things to actually bring people to do the work for the market that they're really most likely to succeed in fast. Um, some people come to us a couple of years in and they've never done a regulatory strategy, and quite a bit of the really good testing and validation work that they've done doesn't meet the requirements. So again, engage early is the same hymn that we're singing all the time. um, Trying to give you an idea on regulatory risk, because it's quite a hard one. If you think of a scalpel, if it's being used to cut paper as part of crafting, it's not even a medical device. That same scalpel, if used to shave hair as part of surgical prep, is now a medical device because it's got a medical use, but it's a lower class, lower risk class, because there's a low chance of it harming the patient. Um, that same scalpel, if is used to cut into skin as part of surgery, that's now a higher risk. It could be dirty, it might not be sharp enough, it might break. There could be anything that could happen which could potentially harm a patient. So that is considered medium risk of harm, which is where the class 2A comes in. And it's this bar, when we hit class 2A, that's when you need a notified body to review your technical documentation and to give you an ISO 13485 QMS certificate. But I'll come to that again later. Then finally, again, the same scalpel used to cut into brain tissue. It's the highest classification, because obviously one false move and that could have very significant harm to the patient. So I think when people are thinking about their product, they say, oh, it's not invasive, but actually if it touches the skin, it could cause a rash, it could cause a problem. Need to think about the materials that are in it. whatever you're thinking, you need to really investigate what other risks are possible, no matter how remote they are. And of course, if you think about, we talked about the in vitro diagnostics like the lateral flow tests. If you can imagine, part of the risk with that is really about the result. So if you get a false negative on a COVID test, what's the worst that could happen? If you get a false negative on a cancer test, what's the worst could happen? And the risk of those two things is completely different. So that's why understanding risk, identifying the risks, and managing them become really important. So going back to the documentation, the kind of things that you need to produce to put into your dossier to be able to show the regulators what you've done, or if you're self-certifying and the regulators haven't seen any of your documentation, you have to have them ready for the day that something goes wrong and they ask to see them. A robust regulatory strategy document, which means I want to take my product to market in the EU. These are every single bit of the regulations, every standard I need to meet, whether they be regulatory, whether they be safety, whether they be legal. These are all the things I've got to do. A quality management certificate of registration. So that would be if you if you need to get your quality management system certified, then you'll go through quite a lot of paperwork to document your processes, and you'll have a quality plan, and you'll be audited every year. So you need to have all of your documents together. And then you've got the technical dossier or technical file, which includes all of the documents that prove all of the technical details of your product. So that'll be a summary of what the product is and what it does, the materials that have been used and specifications, your risk management file, your design history file, um, and your clinical evaluation of the product or products like it, because there's a literature search where we go around and look at other products which maybe are equivalent and what the experience of those products are, because if those products have had issues with safety, then they're things you need to think about. And then finally, the declaration of conformity, which for a self-certified lower class product would be something that you sign, which says, this is us, this is the product, and this is our commitment that we have met the regulations. And obviously, when you submit that to a notified body, that's what they'll be signing off on.
About 5 minutes now.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
problem. Quality management system, you'll hear us talk about a lot. There is a specific medical device regulation on QMS, standard on QMS, which is an ISO 13485, and it's specifically designed for patients. Within the design that you of your product, you need to think very much about how your design controls happen. We get a lot of clients that come to us where something hasn't worked when they've tried to reproduce it, so they change the product. No, 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 it's meant to be the other way around. You design the product to do what it's supposed to do. I'm sure Andy's hearing this and remembering clients where this has been the case. And then you want to make it perform to the expected performance and do the things that it should do. So this all is documented in your design history file, and your QMS will retain all the documentation and evidence for that. I'm not going to go into every part of this. It's just to give you an idea of the quantum of a technical file. There are lots of things in it. Testing results, post-market surveillance plans, checking your labels, all of the specifications for your documents. People come to us and hope that they can just get registered tomorrow. There is quite a lot of work involved, but it's worth it, because once you have the registration, then you can move into various markets.
Do most people employ a specialist QMS person then, to whose job it is purely to keep on top of everything, get the system
Yeah.
set up, run it, ready for audits?
I think when you get to a certain size, yes. I mean, at the beginning, it's really just a tool that you use to document your design control. At a later stage, when you actually become a manufacturer and you're actually making things and selling things, etc., you'd add in all the other processes. And I think once you get to that point, then you take someone on permanently. But until then, you can use part-time resource to do that.
Yeah.
So thinking about low risk and higher risk, if you're in a class one, then you will be able to you still create the same documentation, but you will be able to sign that off yourself. And anybody who's thinking of doing that on their own, absolutely reach out to someone like IMED to get them to review your document, because you don't want to think that you've met the requirements and go off assuming that you have. Find something happens, MHRA come to you and ask for your technical file, it's not good enough and you're off the market. So do get it checked out by somebody who knows. Obviously, with medium and high risk, you go out to a notified body and they're going to review all of your technical documentation. They're going to audit you every year on your quality management system. And so you will get a review by them and they'll give you feedback. And for minor things, you'll be able to put them right. For major things, you could face periods off market. So it's something that you must take seriously to protect your business. And once you've got the approval, as I mentioned before, you're going to have to make sure that you take details of any complaints that come in. If you have something happen with your product, if it doesn't perform as it should have in certain cases, if it harms a patient, even if the MHRA don't cite you and come and talk to you about it and ask you to show your documentation and what you've done about it, you still need to maintain really good records, because if something does go wrong, you need to be able to show them that you are being safe and responsible. So yeah, this is about keeping details of not just your own products, but also of other similar products on the market. Because if someone's using similar technology to you and they have an adverse event and it harms a patient, then you should learn from their mistakes as well. So it's very important that you keep up to date with the market that you're in.
Is there a central data? So, you know, if that happened to a company, one of your competitors, they may not want the world to know about it. Does the MHRA publish that kind of thing? And so
Absolutely,
it's
yes,
in the public domain. So there is a place to go to look for
there
your
is.
competitors. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you'll get various articles in various different markets. I mean, we use PubMed is used a lot in terms of things like looking at clinical efficacy
Yeah.
and safety, and there are articles that you can pick up there. But it should be something that, responsible manufacturers should be interested in wanting to know all of that, because apart from anything else, yes, it's protecting patients, but it's also protecting your business, because if there's a potential hiccup coming along, which could mean you have to recall loads of products, going to cost you money. So it's sensible to keep on top of all of those. So hopefully that's a sort of whistle stop tour of the types of things that people need to consider when they're taking products to market. Defining your product and really nuancing that right down is very important. Get an appropriate regulatory strategy so you've got your roadmap and you know everything that you've got to do. Make sure you have a quality management system, even if you don't want to have a certified ISO 13485 system because you're in a lower class. Have a it's really just prudent management of your business. So to have that in place, even though you might not necessarily to get it certified. And make sure that every change you make with your design, make sure you've got proper change controls, make sure you test every time you change something, and make sure you remember why you did it, because it could be quite difficult if you're going back a couple of years. And get your documentation together and keep it maintained.
Yeah. Fantastic. I must say, everybody, we with one of my clients, we used IMED. So they developed a antimicrobial product, and we wanted to understand what the regulatory pathway might be into half a dozen different product categories. And so we commissioned IMED to do that work. And what that allows us to do is when we license that technology, we're now forearmed about the regulatory pathway that who we license it to might have to go through. So when they say sucking in the teeth, it's going to cost thousands to do this, we know the answer. We can say, no, to do that, it's a class two. This is the kind of things you need. we can be one step ahead of them to make sure we don't get, done on the deal kind of thing. So the work that you did there, Al, for that company was brilliant, because it really gave them that package of information to protect them when they went out to license their tech. And that can be, somebody might have come up with a new piece of medtech technology and it's a baling, twine and plasticine level. They might want to license it, but coming to you to understand the regulatory pathway, yes, they might have to go back for you, but if they license it, they know what that's going to be and what the costs are involved in, and they can build that into their negotiation.
Exactly.
So Al, absolutely brilliant. A bit of a whistle stop tour. We love working with you guys. We've done quite a few projects together, so really, really good. Thank you very much, Al.
Yeah, likewise. Great fun.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, and sort of building on the back of the medtech piece, we're going to a sort of more generic CE marking and compliance piece of work that Conformance do. Now, Henry, you may not know this, but I know your business owner Nick, and I'm sure he was the explosives expert for the British Cave Rescue Association.
He is indeed, Nick.
That
Nick
was
is the
25 years
national
ago.
expert on explosive regulation. Yeah.
Yeah.
We often come into the office and find all kinds of interesting bits of equipment that we're assessing for various.
I thought you were about to say you often come into the office and there's bits of Nick all over the place because he's got it wrong.
No. He's so far managed to avoid making any mistakes in that regard.
Yeah. I used to work with a couple of guys and they were mad as hatters, and they decided they'd make their own gunpowder in their cellar, and they ended up underneath a table dry mixing it in a bowl in the hope that it wouldn't explode, and one of them did, and it was a massive explosion above the table. Anyway, there you go.
Not what you want to be doing.
No, health and safety was not their strong point on that case. Okay, so over to Henry and Conformance. Really looking forward to this one, because CE marking is a crucial part of getting any product into the marketplace.
Excellent. So I hope you can all see my screen right now. As I say, my name's Henry Foxall. I am a senior consultant here at Conformance on all types of CE and UKCA marking, including medical devices. And I'd like to thank Al for an excellent introduction, because actually medical device regulation is one CE and UKCA mark section of a very large pot of things that we really need to be considering generally. Conformance, we're based up in the Peak District. We've been around 35 years. My background is as a material scientist, and I was a medical device regulatory for a material manufacturer. And then I started building factories globally and then got into machinery regulation. So then I've ended up with Conformance. So hopefully that's a little bit of background on me. So as I say, Al's given a great introduction. What is CE marking? Well, it's a mandatory European mark for product safety. And by the way, I will come to UKCA marking later. I'm going to start off just talking about CE marking on the assumption that we're talking about Europe. So it's a mandatory European mark for product safety. So it's a legal requirement to 26 product categories. It may be that your product doesn't need a CE mark, in which case you're not allowed to put one on, but it's something you'll need to consider, certainly at the design stage. And as everyone has said so far, please, please, please consider CE marking at your design stage. It breaks my heart to go and assess lovely bits of equipment at the ready for market stage and have to tell them that they haven't met some critical safety requirements, and they have to go back to the design stage. And it happens more often than I'd like, maybe 3/4 of the time. So please, 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 when you're designing your product, think about your CE marking or your regulatory pathway for a medical device, and don't leave it to the end. Generally speaking, CE marking applies to the 27 countries in the EU. There are a few nuances, particularly Switzerland and Norway, where specific differences may occur because they're in a single market but not actually formally in it. As I say, there's 26 product categories. Here's a nice pictographic examples. So we've got explosives, as we mentioned, construction products, noise relatants, lifts for people, machinery, explosive devices, hard personal protective equipment, pressure equipment, so domestic products, radio equipment, toys is a big one. And then if I move on, this is the slightly less interesting slide, and this is the full list. If your product fits into any of these categories, then you will need to put a CE mark on it or a UKCA mark on it to legally market it in the community or the country where you want to market it. And be aware, your product may fall into multiple categories. So for instance, medical devices, very often machines, very often restriction of hazardous substances, very often pressure vessels. Medical devices also often PPE. So if you have a mask that is used for, so let's go back to COVID again, we've used that example quite a lot. A mask that's to prevent you breathing your germs onto other people could be a medical device, depending on its context. Or it could also be a PPE if it's to stop you breathing in germs from other people. So it could be a medical device, it could be a PPE, or it could be both. And as Al said, it's context dependent. So your marketing will define, in many cases, what CE marking regulations you need to place upon your product. And so conformance deal with all of these. We're a group of about 20 engineers around the country that deal with all of these product categories. And as I say, if your product does not fall into these product categories, you probably won't be able to CE mark it, but you will still be required to market it under SAFE, under the OPSS General Product Safety Regulations, basically ensuring that it's a safe product before you place it on the market and having documentary evidence to say that you've considered that.
So just to confirm there, Henry, that if it requires a CE mark, it has to have a CE mark.
Correct.
But if it doesn't need a CE mark, you still might need to comply to other legislation like the product safety one.
Yeah, the General Product Safety Requirement regulations basically just say your product shall be safe. In practice, that means doing a risk assessment to ensure that you've considered where there may be safety implications. And it considers most of the same things, but you don't place a CE or UKCA mark upon it. Yeah. So I'm not going to pretend that reading through European or UK legislation is everyone's cup of tea. And quite often we speak to people, and I'm sure I'll be the same, who have opened up, for instance, the medical device regulation or the machinery directive, and decided within a few seconds that it's not for them and they need help. That's a common story, but actually most CE marking legislation is laid out very similarly, and there are legislation commonalities to almost all directives and regulations associated with CE marking. Scope, so very important, right up the top of all the regulations. Does this apply to my product? Economic operator duties, come on to economic operators on the next slide. Usually, if you go to a CE marking regulation or directive, the first thing you should do for product design is go to usually Annex 1, and that is a list that will be titled Essential Requirements, Essential Health and Safety Requirements, Particular Requirements. And Annex 1 basically is a list of everything that your product shall do in order to be safe. There will be a section defining the role of standards, and I'll come on to that a bit later as well, and sections defining conformity assessment. So what do you need to do to assess your product? And as Al pointed out, sometimes you can self-declare, but if your product is of a higher risk, you will often need a notified body or an approved body to do that assessment for you. There will always be a section on what information you are obliged to provide your consumers with. So, for instance, what you must put in your user manual, how you must label your product, and what you must mark your product with. Warning labels, for instance. There's a declaration of conformity, which generally takes the same form across all product types, although the information contained may be slightly different. There will be CE marking rules, and there will be a list, again, as Al pointed out, of technical documentation you are required to store, usually for 10 years. It may be longer for medical devices. It may be significantly longer depending on your customer requirements. And there will be a list of what you are required to store. So as I said, economic operators. Now, The more recent the regulation that applies to your CE markable product, the better the description of economic operators will be. But generally, you have manufacturers, importers, distributors, authorised representatives, and fulfilment service providers. Manufacturers are obliged, have the greatest obligation placed upon them, and manufacturers are obliged to have all the data that proves and evidences safety of that product. A very important point that a lot of people miss out is if you are having an OEM, an original equipment manufacturer, manufacture your product in China, and they supply you with some CE marking or some CE certificate. If you are bringing that into the UK or Europe and selling it under your own brand name, then it is irrelevant what you've been provided. You become the manufacturer and you must store all of the data that provides safety, the evidence of safety for that product, which generally involves you having a very strong contract with your OEM manufacturer in China, and they will need to provide you with all the safety data that you ask for. If you are an importer, you are importing a named product to a given country and selling it under its original brand name, then you are required to check that it has been done and satisfy yourself that it has been done correctly. If you are a distributor, you are just required to check that it's been done. An authorised representative comes if you, so let's say you're a UK manufacturer and you want to sell into Europe, then because you are UK based and want to sell into Europe with a CE mark, you will need a European address to do that so that the product safety authorities in Europe have someone within the community to contact should there be a problem. So that's where your authorised representative comes in. It can be yourself, or you can employ a third party to do that for you. And then there are fulfilment service providers, such as people who take products, handle them and ship them on, like a parcel service or something.
So question, Henry, on that fulfillment. So if you go to a finishing house, you get your product made in China, you don't want to handle it, you give it to essentially a finishing house. So they put it into the packaging, they put in the instructions, they package it, they send it out to the client, but you're just getting the money through your website and you pay them for each one. Is the CE marking therefore on your responsibility? The fulfillment house is just a box shifter. Do they have any responsibility or not then?
I would think you'd be required to ensure that you as the manufacturer would be required to ensure that the product controls and the manufacturing controls in place, certainly. And so, for instance, your fulfillment service provider wouldn't be designing the packaging, it would be placing the packaging on it for you. Yeah. And so you would hold the design of the packaging and you would make sure that the information that went on that packaging was correct. So step one of CE marking is the legislation now. Which legislation applies? Product type, we've seen the list, and the features that may be there. Every scope has exclusions. So for instance, quite often there's a military exclusion, quite often there's an exclusion for test equipment. Laboratory equipment is excluded from some, and there are some exclusions based on size as well. And there will be a section, usually up top in all the legislation, that says whether a product is excluded or not. It's also important to understand that some regulations disapply others. So, for instance, if you have a pressurized system, you're storing compressed air to provide some service to a machine, provided that compressed air system is less than a certain size, then your CE marking is actually machinery, not pressure equipment. And you pass that onto your machinery. And the same for electrical as well. Often you will use your machinery CE mark to cover the low voltage directive aspects of your equipment. Not all the time, but generally that's the way it goes. So you will CE mark to the machinery directive, which will invoke the low voltage directive, but you won't actually mention the low voltage directive on the declaration of conformity. The next step is to look at standards. Now, as I've mentioned, each CE marking legislation will have a set of essential requirements that you are designed to meet, and it is those essential requirements that are your legal obligations. However, in many cases, there will be an ISO or an IEC standard out there which details state-of-the-art requirements or state-of-the-art ways in which you control risks associated with your product. Now, there are such things called harmonised standards in Europe and designated standards in the UK. If you have an EN prefix to a standard, so this one on the screen is BSEN 60204-1, which is electrical safety. Because it has that EN in there, it's called a harmonised standard, which means if you follow the standard to the letter, you will automatically comply with your CE marking obligations for electrical safety and do not need to go back to the regulation directly. It's called presumption of conformity. Now, using a standard is not a legal obligation. Your legal obligation is the essential requirement. However, to meet that essential requirement, it is usually easiest and simplest to use a harmonised standard where it exists. Otherwise, you have to evidence that you have equivalent safety, which is often difficult because these harmonised standards have been designed by committees of 40, 50, 60 engineers globally, and they're basically doing your work for you and telling you what you need to do. So that's an important part. So once you worked out what essential requirements you need and what you need to do to control hazards and risks associated with your product, then go and look for the standard that tells you how to control those risks most suitably. And then, as we've talked about before, you do a conformity assessment. So usually this takes the form of a checklist. So take each point of the EHSR, the essential requirements of the product directive you're using or the regulation you're using, and show and check that you've complied with each statement on there. And if you haven't complied with them, go and do it. If they're not applicable, mark them as not applicable. Don't just ignore them. You may be able to self-declare. So, for instance, for machinery, 95% of machines can be self-declared. You sit there and say, I, to the best of my ability and on my sole declaration, say I have met the rules and the regulation requirements, and you place that product on the market saying and signing that you have met your requirements. It will come back to you if there's an issue, and then the market surveillance authorities may ask you for your technical file, and if you haven't done it properly, that's where the trouble will start. However, if you have a higher risk bit of equipment, then you will need to get a notified body involved. They may want to see a quality management system, they may want to see the technical information, or they may have much more stringent things involved in order to conform to the system.
So the role of conformance in this as a company, can you work with a company to set them up and then they self-declaration? Can you then not rubber stamp it, but go in and do like a mock audit to say, yeah, you are good enough to go, in our opinion?
Certainly, yes. So we last year's winner of the TBAT Innovation Challenge, or our part of it, we worked very closely with. They came to us and they had a lovely product, a really good product that was going to disrupt the market, but they hadn't considered the CE regulation. So we worked with them from step one, saying, okay, this is the legislation that applies to your device. These are the standards that apply to your device. We wrote them a report and said, this is what you need to do. We provided them with a set of steps that they should follow to get to the point where they were okay legally to place their product on the market. And then before they placed it on the market, we worked with them to review and audit their information to check they had everything they needed for their tech.
Yeah.
So
okay, brilliant.
For full service. And, you know, we do all product categories. I'm a medical device specialist as well. So we do medical devices. But yeah, and we go right from start to the finish, and we can pick up at any place. Conformers also quite often we work when there's been a workplace incident. We can go in on behalf of the HSC and audit supposedly CE marked or UKCA marked equipment to check that it had been done correctly. If you see a CE marked product that's been to a notified body, there will usually be 4 numbers after the CE mark, and that is the designation of the notified body that's done the assessment or the conformity assessment for you. And we mentioned technical documentation quite a lot. Generally, there's quite a lot that needs to go in there, but it will generally describe the equipment. It will cover the conformity assessment results and evidence that you've done what you need to do. It will look at ongoing production control, Generally, you need to retain for 10 years, sometimes more. And the key point is you need to have that so the enforcement authority can access that should they be required to. Now, generally, if there are no incidents with your product in the market, you may never have to show your technical documentation to anyone. However, if there is an incident and the HSE or the Market Surveillance Authorities come and ask you to see your technical documentation, you will be required to present it in short order, which doesn't mean you have to have everything immediately, but it does mean you have to know where everything is. And you should imagine it like an auditor sat on your doorstep. You don't want to keep them waiting too long. And the final step, as we've talked about before, is to have a declaration of conformity. And this is a statement declaring that a product complies with the requirements of the applicable CE marking legislation, and it's under your sole responsibility as a manufacturer. The distributor, the importer, doesn't sign it, the manufacturer does. But remember, you become the manufacturer if you rebrand anything that's been made elsewhere.
Yeah. And on that one, on that example, I can see it's got low voltage, it's got EMC, and it's restriction of hazardous. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So on this document, you will list the legislation you've applied to your equipment, and you'll generally list the harmonised standards that you've used to evidence that you've met those requirements.
Yeah.
We see a very, very wide range of quality of these declarations of conformity, and I'd say 3/4 of them are nowhere near meeting the requirements of the legislation. And it's all defined clearly in the legislation what you need to do. And so it's obvious that most people don't actually read the rules, which is where we come in, and is where Alison comes in as well, previous speaker.
Yeah.
And then you can go to manufacture, really. Once you've got all this in place, you can place a CE mark on your equipment and you can head off to manufacture. Now, it's important to realise that your product is being surveyed on the market. It may not appear that it is, but there are people out there who will be checking that products on the market are safe. And if there is any concern over a particular product, it may be because someone's reported it, it may be because there's an incident, or it may be because the market surveillance regulators have just come across your product and don't believe it's been done properly. Then the responsible EU economic operator will be contacted by the market surveillance regulation for technical information. So the responsible EU economic operator's contact details must be with the product. And as we've explained, if you are a UK manufacturer wanting to sell into Europe, you will need a European address. And that can be a sister company, it can be a sub-part of your own company, but as small entrepreneurs and SMEs, the likelihood of you having a European address is quite small. So you may want to employ a third party to be that European address for you. We have a sister company called Authorised Representative Services. If you contact them with a product that you want to place on the market, they will provide you with a European address and they will hold your technical file for you. And the only thing they ask is that they audit that technical file first to check that it meets the requirements of the legislation you claim that it does. And there'll be an ongoing fee for that. It's the same if a European company wants to place something on the market in the UK, or if anyone from outside Europe or the UK wants to place something on the market in either Europe or the UK. Now, Brexit made the UK a separate market, and it gave us all our independence, but also it gave us our independent rules. That means that there are similarities and there are differences between what you need to do to place your product on the market in Great Britain, in Northern Ireland, and in Europe. Generally speaking, at the moment, there hasn't been any divergence in the essential requirements and the product requirements. There are a few notable exceptions. Medical devices we've covered. Batteries, the new batteries regulation came in Europe, and so now basically batteries need to be CE marked. And there are a few little divergences appearing here and there. There's new machinery regulation coming out next year, and that will introduce some divergences as well. Generally speaking, the UK legislation, although it contains its own nuances, will usually contain a statement saying, for essential requirements, see the European directive. So in most cases, we are still in the UK following the European rules. But it's worth checking. So if you are marketing in the UK, you will need to look at the UK statutory instrument, which might be the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations, and read that, and then the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations will say, see the Machinery Directive, and so you'll need to see that as well.
Yeah.
It's one of the joys of being an independent nation. Now, conformance, as I say, we've got 20 consultants around the country. We have engineers from all walks of life. I say I'm a material scientist and a medical device specialist. We have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, pressure equipment engineers. We also have associate engineers who generally have been working for notified bodies and have finished working for notified bodies, and they advise us as engineers on what the notified bodies might expect in certain instances. So that should give confidence to our clients that we know what we're talking about. We provide tailored advice, as we've discussed, and consultancy, assessments of documents. We can provide training for you if you want to do it yourself. We have a web shop in which we sell checklists, declaration templates, various documents, particularly toy manufacturers. Often a toy manufacturer is a very small operation and may want to do some of the extensive testing themselves, which they can do. And we also provide an update service, and this is a key. If you have CE marked or UKCA marked a product, you need to ensure that you maintain compliance with the standards and the regulations as they change. So we can update you when the significant changes appear to particular standards that may apply to your product, and you can review them accordingly to see whether your product will remain safe in the considered state of the art.
Well,
and that's all I've got to say today, really. As I say, it's not a product, it's not necessarily a topic that I expect everyone to be enthralled to be involved in, but unfortunately it is certainly, because it's a legal obligation, then CE marking and UKCA marking is something to be considered at the design stage. Please don't leave it until you're making something.
And I think, you know, how you, so it's both medical and non-medical device, both yourselves and IMED, first port of call, understand what you're letting yourself in for, and as you say, understand what level of conformance you need to be working with. And I think that point you made about a UK manufacturer selling stuff into Europe, how many of those have actually got a European address? Correct. Or whether they just sell and hope for the best. And I suspect it's much the latter than the former.
Yeah, you will very quickly be contacted by someone if you don't have a European address, because it will have to be on the declaration of conformity. And Alison made a really good point, is make sure your business case will stand up to the regulatory costs of doing this. Particularly with medical devices. If you are a small company wanting to put a medical device on the market in Europe, do not underestimate the costs of doing that and the amount of your product you will need to sell in order to begin to recoup those setup costs to even access the market. And it's a big barrier to new devices, but it also makes it extremely lucrative. If you can make sure that your product is suitable for those markets, there's a potential for you to sell it on to one of the big boys that has a whole department of 100 people to do that for you. So that's a significant income generator for entrepreneurial medical device designers. Is, can this product be sold and placed on the market by someone else who's paid me handsomely for the royalties for it?
That kind of thing. We kind of chat about in a bit more in the next workshop, but it's that, if every time your product changes hands, it needs to double in cost. And will the end market actually handle the cost? If it costs you 50, you sell it for 100, they buy for 100, sell it for 200, which means the end user's paying 400. Will they stand that? Because you need to generate that kind of money to pay for it could be the patenting, and then you need patent box. It could be to recover your R&D costs, your tooling costs, your CE marking costs. There's an awful lot of costs involved in getting a product to market that I think people forget about and can get really badly caught. So Henry, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for coming along this afternoon, and thank you for, I think it was Zeal, was it, that you dealt with?
It was Zeal, yeah. We
Yeah.
are still dealing with them. They've continued. They've had a few hold-ups. They were getting their product manufactured in China and rebranding it, and they've had a few hold-ups with the associated testing according with it, because it came as quite a shock to them that actually they needed to provide all the evidence themselves and hold their own technical data file. And so they needed to get a lot of the design calculations, a lot of the manufacturing data, and a lot of the testing data, raw data as well, that was considered IP by their chosen OEM. They needed to get that data from them and store it themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so we've just got a question here. Can you market prototypes or prototype instruments without a CE mark?
You can certainly take them to trade shows and exhibitions. As to whether you can you won't be able to place them on the market without a CE mark, but you can do certain marketing activities with them without a CE mark.
So could you lend somebody a sample? Or is that stretching the bounds of?
I think depending on the person you spoke to, you'd get a different answer on that one.
Yeah.
I'm of the opinion you're pushing the boundaries of what you'd be allowed to do, but you'd probably not get picked up on it.
Yeah. So I mean, CE marking's there to protect people, isn't it?
Yeah. And if you were lending someone something as a prototype device, so generally it's not just placing on the market, it's also putting into service. So if that person was considered to be putting it into service, regardless of whether they've paid for it or not, then it would need CE marking.
Yeah. Okay. So Mark is Kane. If you'd like to follow up with Henry on that question, if you need more information, then please do so. There might be a connection there for you. Henry, thank you so much. That's been absolutely brilliant. We are running a few minutes late, but I think we're not doing the second break, which is great. So yeah, thank you, Henry. And we've got Lee Garton now from Bulb Studio. So we're changing tact here. We're moving from sort of we've talked about IP protection, a little bit on product design, but IP protection, then the legals, then regulation, and now we're getting back to about product and market and people and stuff. So Lee's from Bulb Studios, great partners of ours at Bulb. I know Jim and Matt very, very well indeed, and obviously yourself, Lee. And you're going to be talking about UX and UI. I think you're running your own slides, yeah?
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I'll have a go at it anyway.
Yeah. So is 20 minutes okay?
Yeah, I think so. Just shout at me if I'm going on, and I'll try and cut it short.
Yeah. And then we've got Neil Codd from Ignis, which is going to be fantastic. That's all about making sure that the products you design are what the customer wants and building that into your conversations. So, okay, Lee, off you go. Let's see what.
Can you see my slides okay?
I can indeed. Yeah, brilliant.
Magic. You can't see my notes, just see my slides.
I could. Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Just checking.
Yeah, you've got the joke to read, haven't you now? That's right.
Yeah. The punchline's coming. No, thanks, Sam. And yeah, as you just mentioned, I'm just going to share some brief insights, a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour, if you like, of UX, a crucial aspect when you're developing a digital product. Before I jump into it, a quick introduction to myself and the company that I work for. I'm Lee, I'm design director at Bulb. I started my career maybe not far from 20 years ago, started off in brand and marketing, but I've been working in digital for the last 12 years, and I specialize in designing digital products and experiences. I work for a company called Bulb Studios. We're an independent digital product studio based in the heart of Leicester. We're kind of like a boutique size team of designers, developers, researchers and strategists, and we create software, apps, websites, things like in-car technologies, anything on a screen basically that we kind of refer to as a digital product. We partner with both local, national, international organisations of all sizes. We work across all sectors. including automotive, space, education, retail, sport. Trying to look what else we've got on here. And there's a few sort of big brands on here, but some of the work that I'm really proud of and would love to sort of highlight is more of the things we do with startups and SMEs, such as Earth Sensor on the bottom row there. We've been working with them since 2019, and we've partnered with them over the last sort of 5 years to launch their My Air software, which enables government and local authorities to monitor real-time, historic and forecast air quality data. So we've got a real sort of proven track record of working with entrepreneurs and early stage companies in sort of bringing new product ideas to life. That's a brief little introduction into me and Bulb. So yeah, today I'm just going to share some insights about UX, what it is, why it's important, and how it can benefit your business. And regardless of the stage that you're at with your digital products, investing in UX or good user experience can be the make or break of the success of the project. So here's the joke in a minute, so it's coming. So what is UX? I get asked this quite a lot, surprisingly, considering the term's been around for many years. And if you Google sort of like an official definition of UX, you'll find like quite complex descriptions like this one. Like, user experience includes all of the user's emotions, beliefs, preferences, perceptions, physical and psychological responses, behaviors. I mean, my mouth's actually getting dry just going through the sentence. It's quite a sort of academic and quite technical definition of the term. In fact, I'm going to have a little sip of water on that. But I prefer this definition. This is more of a kind of, I guess, a user-friendly definition of UX, I guess. And this is from Don Norman, who's the co-founder of the Nielsen Norman Group, who are, I think they may have been in the company that actually coined the term UX. Might need to check on that one, but they're definitely one of the leading UX research companies. And their definition is: user experience encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. And I think this is really important. Like, UX is about how people feel, like when they're navigating your website, when they're using your app, or engaging with your product in some way. But it's also equally important to consider other experiences related to the digital product. For example, a marketing campaign, social media activity, packaging, after sales support. Anything that's related to the product itself can be classed as user experience. And user experience is a combination of like functional design, usability, and more importantly, the experience design. It's not just about making products functional or beautiful in some cases. It's about creating products that are intuitive, accessible, and more importantly, delightful to use. So why is it important? Well, we live in an ever-connected world where users have endless options at their fingertips. And in that kind of world, UX can be a key point of difference. There's a publication that came out maybe sort of like 4 or 5 years ago called The $1 Trillion UX Problem, which is like a big industry-wide publication in the States. Had sort of people from Google, people from Amazon kind of contributing to it. And one of the key studies was by a research partner that found that on average, for every dollar invested in UX would bring $100 in return, which is quite a headline grabbing statistic. But I think it's an important thing to start thinking about when you start to look at the benefits. So whenever we as a company are sort of selling what we do as services and talking about UX, and people are starting to sort of rationalize like why it is important, these are some of the things that we would sort of highlight. So good UX can help with brand reputation. So being consistent with your brand and products and offering a good user experience is key when you're building brand reputation and building trust as well with your audience. Good UX can lead to increased customer loyalty. When people find satisfaction in your brand and product, those customers will return again and again and again and tell friends and family and colleagues about your brand. Good UX can lead to higher conversion rates, like things like intuitive navigation, clearly organized content, well organized calls to action, sort of real sort of basic principles like that can ensure that users flow through your product efficiently and removing barriers in conversion, which can then lead to increased sales and revenue. And lastly, good UX can give you that competitive edge. One of the companies that I've followed throughout my career, Airbnb, and they always attribute UX as one of the key factors in their success in the early days. And they often cite that their redesign in 2014 doubled their bookings. Now, this is a bit of a golden oldie of ours at Bull, but it's a project we worked on possibly getting on for 10 years ago. But it's an important one to highlight the impact of UX on a business. So this project was for Warner Brothers Studio Tour London. And this is when it kind of just had started out. It'd kind of been in operation for a couple of years. But at the time, we were commissioned to design and build a new website that focused on streamlining ticket transitions. Now, they had a current website, and that did a really, really good job, as you'd expect, of showcasing the Harry Potter films, the exhibits within the tour, like highlighting information about how to get to the tour, all the kind of usual things. But it wasn't designed as a website to sell tickets as an attraction. Now, I'm going to simplify it, like without going into, I think this project was like a year-long project, and without going into too much of the detail, we can sort of like distill some of the success down to a really, real simple solution. Now, we are talking about sort of 8 years ago. I mean, this probably sounds quite obvious now to people, but our solution was to place a bright red button in the top right corner of every single page that said get tickets. It featured on every page in the navigation bar, and then other areas of the site that had a high dwell time, giving that ticket button just real high contrast and prominence. But even something as simple as that, compared to their old site, led to the statistics over on the left there. So there was a 150% conversion rate across all channels. They had a 300% conversion rate in mobile. And more importantly for them, they had an increased daily revenue of 124%. And believe it or not, the website, the investment that and the money that they paid out to us paid for itself in a week, which is amazing considering we worked on it for a lot longer than that. Yeah. So that's just an example of where sort of simple UX practices and putting UX up front and center of a project can lead to some real sort of key business level sort of figures that kind of attribute towards that success. So applying UX, we've just got a couple of well, maybe 5 steps that we would apply UX, in particular in kind of new product development. Research, design, prototype, test, iterate. You'll see these terms a lot, and they kind of they important across all different types of design projects, but equally important in digital product development. So the first starting point for us when we get commissioned for work, and our advice to any early stage company or entrepreneur with a new idea is research. Now, Andy from Oxford Product Design highlighted this at the sort of start of their process earlier on in the day. And to sort of emphasize it again, like we cannot stress the importance enough of understanding your audience inside and out, understanding what people need, what they think, how they behave. It's a real sort of crucial part of the process of like validating the idea first, but also obviously in designing, in the process of designing products, to make sure that we understand who we're designing for, what the end user is going to use this particular product for, how they're going to get the most out of it, and even to make sure that to ensure that this idea, make sure there's a market for it. So research is one of the key aspects in designing a product that resonates for an audience. Now, another quote, I like a quote. This one's from Jack Dorsey, the co-founder of Twitter, Square, and others. If you want to build a product that's relevant to people, you need to put yourself in their shoes. And this is something that, again, we put on all of our pitch decks, this particular quote. And without this insight into your audience, you can fall into the trap, both of us as designers, or as a design company, or as people who have an idea, companies, entrepreneurs. You can fall into the trap of making assumptions, and assumptions about your audience can lead you down the wrong path to creating a product that isn't relevant to the audience. So never assume that you know enough.
Assume makes an ass of you and me. Oh, hey.
Too true. I'll add that one. I'll add that one to next year, Sam. The next one, design. I guess in a lot of ways it's kind of our bread and butter as a kind of service. But one of the methods that we specialize in and that we utilize with startups and new product development are something called design sprints. The design sprint was a methodology developed by Google Ventures, and we've kind of tailored and adapted that process to fast track our design process to test new concepts. So it's kind of like a short, intense period of research and design that can take a new product idea and translate it into a design concept or concepts. It's something that we do often. We've got a couple of these underway at the moment, and they are of real value. I'm working with a particular entrepreneur at the moment, and she's kind of working through one of the competitions through UK Innovate, and she's been through their innovation canvas, and she kind of created all of these worksheets for a particular idea. And we've ran an initial sort of 2-week sprint to take some of those, pencil sketches, and kind of brain dumps that came out of the UK Innovate program, to translate that into a click-through prototype, something that's quite lo-fi. It's not using real data or real technology. It's a design prototype, but it's something that she's now taking out to test with, her peers, her friends, her family, and some of the audience she's thinking of targeting. Which takes me on to our next slide, prototyping. So outputs of our design sprint, they always end up as a prototype. So we take an idea, we do some intense design work, we end up with some form of prototype. A prototype is a low cost and low risk way of testing a new idea with your audience. They can manifest themselves in lots of different ways, depending on your budget. We can create fully functional sort of prototypes that utilize real data and technology, or for shorter sprints, like I mentioned, we can create kind of design, kind of click-through prototypes that just give people a flavor of what the product might manifest itself like. But it's a really, really important output of the design sprint to make sure that you can quite quickly get something to get testing that idea with people. So testing, it can get you invaluable and, more importantly, unbiased feedback from the people that matter to you. It can have a big impact on the success of the product and give you powerful insights and fresh perspectives from your target audience. Now, in some cases, like the client I just mentioned, she doesn't actually have clients. So she owns a business, but the product that she's developing isn't for that business or its audience. So she's still trying to work out who that audience is. So she's taking the prototype we gave her out, to local business events, and, like I mentioned, sort of peers, friends and family, to sort of test the water of a prototype. And it doesn't really sort of matter how big that audience is. Getting it out in front of people and sort of asking the right questions to get that invaluable feedback is paramount. And if we're sort of working with companies on testing or user testing, there are a number of different mechanisms to get feedback. Simple things like surveys or questionnaires, just observing people perform tasks, on an app or a website, or doing things that are a bit more sort of technical, like eye tracking or heat mapping, are good kind of mechanisms to kind of capture feedback for a prototype. Lastly, iterate. Use the feedback that you get from testing to improve your products. Like, UX is an ongoing process. It doesn't end with a prototype or an MVP or a fully launched product. UX, it continues long after a launch. It continues as long as a product is in use by people.
Yeah. So where do you stand, Lee, with, I've come across loads and loads of software companies, and they never put the head above the parapet. So they say, oh, we're going to launch with a minimum viable product, but they never do. And it takes them years to get right, we're ready to launch, by which point they might have missed the boat. And so the importance of getting a minimum viable product into the marketplace to try it. And as an example, so Betfair did that when they launched. They launched with a minimum viable product to prove that what they had with the like the split gambling on live events and whatnot would work. And then they built over the years with the revenue a better and better and quicker and more robust system.
Yeah.
So I went to see them with a client who we were looking at another type of football gambling. And they said, we launched with a minimum viable product. And yes, we did have problems to begin with, but we got it in the marketplace. People got to know us. We built it more and more. A huge success story. They own Stoke-on-Trent now, don't they? This other company heard all that, but they raised millions and spent it developing a system that they never launched and ran out of money. And I kept saying to them, why aren't you launching? Why don't you just launch it? Yes, it might be a bit slower than people want. Yeah, but it needs to be like super quick. And so they never launched. So they never got the user experience piece back, and they just ran out of money at the end. So that user experience piece, you need that minimum viable product out there to prove it. Yes, you can do your testing, but you still need to launch. But as you say, it never stops evolving, does it?
It never stops evolving, and that's a great case study, that one. And Monzo, the online banking company, they went down a similar approach. I went to a talk with their head of design a few years ago, and when they launched into the market in London, they identified early adopters of being kind of like late teens to sort of early 30s, that kind of like young professional creative kind of industry kind of people. And they launched in East London only, and their first iteration of the app, the only feature that it had was that if you downloaded the app and created an account, you could send money from one Monzo account to another. So you could literally pay someone. Just a really, really simple feature. And that was their approach to feature development. It was to do one thing and do one thing really, really well, test it and build up an audience with it, and to develop features one after another to keep iterating upon it. I think one of the challenges that we've found, over the years that we've been working, with so many great people is sort of taking our clients, taking entrepreneurs on the kind of journey of that understanding that you have to, although one of the hardest things is actually sort of taking an idea and trimming it down to an MVP, something that is ready for market. We've worked with clients before who have sort of, their understanding of what they need to launch is quite big, quite wide, lots of features. They're kind of seeing that kind of end goal, but not sort of understanding that you can actually just launch into the market with that single feature and build from there.
Yeah.
We had a client, just another quick case study of that. We had a client who were based out, well, half in the UK, half in the States, who were sort of developing a piece of software that kind of integrated with HubSpot. It was aimed at fintech startups. And again, when we were working with Scott and Alex, like they had this grand plan. They saw their exit in a few years. They kind of had all of these features kind of mapped out in the head of what they needed to do. But we were working with them, maybe over sort of 18 months. We got an MVP, released that out to a really sort of small set of users. It was quite a slow moving thing for them. But by doing that, one of the things that small set of users said to them was, some of the things you've done already we're not really bothered about. The one thing that we want is the HubSpot integration that you keep putting on the backlog. Once you get that, everything's going to sort of take off. And it was prioritizing the right features, keeping things skinny to give them the best chance of putting that product out and not spending too long developing that kind of final product.
Yeah, amazing.
I'm nearly done now, Sam. This is actually the conclusion slide, so hopefully I'm on
there we go.
So yeah, I mean, to wrap up, hopefully that's been insightful. But the key takeaway from me is that UX, it's not just a phase in the development process. It's a philosophy. It should guide every decision you make with your product. And by prioritizing UX, you're not just building a product, you're crafting experiences that can lead to customer loyalty and business success.
Yeah. And that's whether it's software, hardware, a soft product, a hard product, a service. User experience is key, isn't it? And if they do come up with a problem, how do you resolve it? So, and that's improving the UX, isn't it? So, yeah. Lee, amazing. Thank you very much. That's as always an absolute pleasure having you on the workshop. And I've not seen that one before, the UX one, because we usually cover lots of other bits and bobs as well. But yeah, and then the chat around the MVP and getting it to market, so you can actually see what people really think in the marketplace. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got one more talk. We've got Neil from, let me just, from Ignis. Neil, yeah, there he is. And I think, Neil, you're doing your own slides, aren't you?
I am indeed, yes.
Yeah. So, so you're talking sort of you're talking about the customer journey, but also around the electronics and the work that Ignis do, isn't it? And to kind of educate people about other things they need to be considering.
Yeah. So
thank God for that. I thought, yeah, there you go. Could have said something else completely, couldn't you? But
well, that's true. I could.
Okay, so yeah, 20 minutes. Off you go, please, Neil.
Okay, so look, Sam, you were talking about people that start a product in effect and never actually launch because they never actually get there. They're always going after that last thing. And on that theme, I've decided this time to just switch this around a little bit. Rather than tell people what they should do, I'm going to try and give people an idea of what they shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And explain some of the things that we've seen and the mistakes that people make. So hopefully, 3.5 hours in now, it'll be a little bit different and people might just stay awake a little bit.
Stay awake.
Stay away. So first off, a little bit about me. So again, I'm an engineer. I make stuff. I make stuff that you've probably used. If you've used oil and gas, you've probably benefited from products I've made. If you've bought products on board an aircraft, you've used software that I've been responsible for. If you've gone to a football game, you probably bought tickets with systems I've built. And again, if you've been bowling, I'm probably responsible for the system that keeps your score and allocates you a lane and all manner of different things. As a company, we've been going about 6 years and we're a little bit unusual. We're a bunch of geeks. We're a bunch of techies. But if you look at us, and I encourage people to follow us on Facebook, we're unusual. We've won Design Team of the Year award 3 times in a row. And that isn't one that you get by placing an order for a table. It's actually voted by our peers. We give away lots of Lego. Our engineers are all expert at something random. And you can see one of the pictures there. One of our engineers was sort of intrigued by a lot of our competitors copying what we did. So he decided to do some fire breathing on one of our LinkedIn posts. So, we do all manner of things and we work on projects from oil and gas, agri-tech, battery storage for energy management, all the way through to retro computers. And anybody that remembers the Sinclair Spectrum, we're the geeks in Nottingham that did all the work on the Spectrum Next, which was a big runaway success on Kickstarter recently. So that's sort of us. So we've heard about understanding customer needs, understand who they are, how they're going to work, how they're going to sell, understand what they do, what their occupation is, what their interest is, how they're going to buy, when they're going to buy, how are they buying it on a website, app, in person, and what do they expect from the product. So that's all really good stuff, normal standard stuff. And then people generally start building a product and they get into proof of concept. Everybody familiar with the idea of proof of concept? It's a waste of time. You can make anything work. You can prove any concept. It's a matter of time and cost. Yeah, how much money do you want to put into it? How much time do you want to put into it? It's a complete waste of time. But a lot of customers are fixated about proof of concept. And we like to talk about proof of value. People don't buy a concept. They buy something else. They buy the value that that product is going to give them. Is it going to give them more money? Is it going to give them more time? Is it going to make them more attractive? Is it going to make them more employable? Something like that. So it's really about proof of value. But also, we work a lot with startups. And the big thing about proof of value is it actually encourages investment. You know, we've had a lot of people started the journey of product development and then failed. And they failed because they run out of money. Yeah, investors pull out. They like the idea, but they don't quite see where the value is. So that is a big thing that I would suggest people sort of take on board. Proof of concept, yeah, forget those. It's really about proof of value. The other thing is about making sure the development's appropriate. So we had a prospect talking to us for a number of months, and they'd got this proposition where they were going to build a product, they were going to sell it in lots of different markets. They come up with a clever name for their company based on how they thought the product would look. And they spent all of their time fixating about the look and the feel. But they never actually got a working set of electronics. So they couldn't prove their basic proposition. It looked great. You know, they'd spent money on castings, on spinning aluminium, making it look absolutely great. But they couldn't actually prove it did what they needed it to do, what the value was. And they're still floundering along. And at some point, they will run out of money because people won't invest. People can't see that value. So what's really important is doing the development that is appropriate for that time. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we see with people that work with us and come to us. So I guess it's a little bit unusual in electronics.
So got a question then, Neil. So if somebody comes to you, you know, I've got a new style of accordion, can you do me a proof of concept? Would you then work with them to understand, okay, what does the proof of value need to look like? And then do you go through a process of, you know, what features are essential? Do you go through a process with them so you can then not define what the proof of concept needs to be, but what the proof of value is, get their buying into that, and you work with them to explain why you need to do this and what that means for them to go out and raise more money or whatever? Is that a process that you as a company go through then?
It is, but sometimes it can be a challenge.
Or do you have to slide it in through the back door side of kind of thing? So
again, sometimes yes, but very often founders have blinkers. So yes, the successful companies do listen. We encourage them to go that route and produce something that shows that value. And those companies generally move forward with a successful product. But there are a number of people that do have blinkers on and they do struggle. Yes, absolutely, something that we try and go through. So when you're building an electronic product, you've got sort of 5 main ways you can do this. You can build it yourself, but the majority of people don't really understand electronics. They may have used a few development kits and wired a few things together. You can bring in a technical co-founder, and that's generally Fred at the end of the street that knows about electronics. And very often that can be a challenge. You can bring in an outsourced freelance engineer, so you go on to Fiverr or somewhere like that and get somebody in to do the development. You can go out to a development firm or you can partner with a manufacturer. Now, they all have their place, but the challenge is getting that right for your organization. You know, very often we'll see people bring in a graduate engineer and they have one way of doing things and their experience is limited and they don't think about how those engineers are going to build up their skill sets. And that's where working with a company like us can be a massive benefit. So they can still do the actual development, but we can actually do the design reviews and actually scale up the knowledge inside that business. Again, that's one of the big mistakes people make. So you talked earlier about developing the software and not finishing things. A lot of people struggle with this, particularly with IoT, Internet of Things, and how they build that platform. You know, do they go paid? Do they go open source? Are they going to use Microsoft? Are they going to use Google? Are they going to use Amazon? Well, the answer is it sort of doesn't matter. Whatever you do, you're going to choose the wrong one. Some markets will only work with one way, some markets will work a different. If you're putting stuff into Saudi Arabia, they won't work on some platforms. If you're going into Dubai, it's something else. America is different yet again. So what you need to do is keep yourself very open, allow you to move in different ways and not tie yourself down. So we've seen people that are adamant, you know, I'm going to use AWS. But the problem is then they can't move from AWS. They're stuck with that way of doing it. The same thing applies with platforms that are out there. This is just a quick capture of some of the logos of IoT platforms that I could find very, very quickly. A frightening number. And people that have developed on one of these platforms very often find themselves down a dead end. So you have to think about how that model is going to go forward, how you can put this into different territories, how you can scale it, what's going to happen when you go from 1 unit to 10 units to 100 units to 100,000 units. A lot of these platforms that are encouraging people to build these early products only really work at a small scale. And then you're going to have to throw the whole thing away. So for that reason, what we've developed is an IoT platform that we can put on any platform. And that's the advantage of doing it that way. It's all based on open source. You can deploy it in any territory, use it for any purpose, and you can scale it up or down as much as you want. And that's the sort of thing that you need to be thinking about in all of these IoT platform solutions that people are developing. So we talked a little bit earlier about the certification and the challenges of UKCA and CE. But it gets worse than that when you go outside of Europe. America, you have to start worrying about FCC. But then if it's a connected device, you have to worry about PTCRB, which is something that's been created by the telecom providers in the US. And I don't know if people are aware, there's a whole series of changes being made around security. So as part of UKCA and also CE, the red standards now include cybersecurity. So this is very much something which is a moving target. And at the moment, it's quite a challenge to understand what those regulations actually say. And that's a big part of the things people get wrong. So they build a platform, they get a prototype in, but they haven't considered the security aspects of what they're doing. And again, this just gives you an idea of the sort of scale of the problem. These are the certification bodies, if you like, that I've had to work with in the last 5 or 10 years of doing connected systems.
But is there a case, Neil, that a UK startup might just target the UK market and then hope to sell out, and then it becomes somebody else's problem to take it on, let that run in the UK, and then rebuild a platform at the back end?
To a degree, yes, but particularly with connected devices, it's a challenge. So the UK, for example, doesn't have the right connectivity that you would then need to use elsewhere in the world. At the moment, so there's two main IoT protocols out there, NB-IoT and LTM. We don't have 100% coverage in the UK on any provider.
Yeah.
But if you're going to take it to the US, you can't use GPRS. You've got to use LTM. So yes, to a degree, but of course, everybody then wants to take it somewhere else. They want to take it to an exhibition in Dubai, where you then find another problem because you can't use roaming SIMs in Dubai.
Yeah, but coming to somebody like yourself, they could say, this is the kind of thing we're looking to develop.
Yeah.
From the research we've done, this is where we think our markets might go: UK, Northern Europe, Canada. And you can say, okay, we'll do a piece of research where you might have that information. What you need to think about is A, B, C, and D. So you need to think about designing it to act on these protocols, but actually do that piece of work up front.
Absolutely. There's no good doing all of the work in the UK when in 6 months' time you need to be putting this into Europe, or your big market is in the US.
Yeah.
So yeah, understanding that roadmap, hitting the sweet spots for that market is really critical.
Yeah.
And again, it's an area where somebody like us is able to help. So then I've just put a few things to remember. So everybody builds a product, and very often they're trying to collect data with that product. And this is quite an interesting slide. It shows the amount of total data in the world against time. And you can see the impact that the Internet of Things is having in the volume of data that's out there. And that's quite scary. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this quote.
Got about 5 minutes, Neil. Yeah, got about 5 minutes.
Okay, yeah. All right, no problem. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with this quote, data is the new oil, done by a guy called Clive Humby. Now, I pretty much guarantee everybody's got one of his products in their wallet. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's the guy, along with his wife Edwina, who developed the Tesco Club Card. Right? But it's interesting, it's a misquote. The quote is actually that. Data is the new oil, it's valuable, but if unrefined, it cannot be used. It has to be changed into something useful. And I think that's really quite important in this connected world of developing products. And a lot of people just really don't understand that. And then the other one is a quote by John Naisbitt, where he talked about an economy based on a resource that's not only renewable but self-generating. Running out is not a problem, drowning in it is. And he actually made that quote in 1982, which I find quite scary. And that's a big part of what we need to think about when we're developing products. It's not about data, it's about actionable insight. It's making something tell us when something needs to be done, not recording information. So then, quickly, I'll just run through these. Things to think about. You cannot break the laws of physics. However good we are as electronic engineers, if the laws of physics are there, we are unable to break them. Yeah, the number of times people want something faster, quicker, battery life needs to be longer. Unfortunately, we do have to abide by the laws of physics. When you're building a product, you need to design it for manufacture, test, availability, and battery life, not try and retrospectively fit it in. And again, very often people will come to us with something that they think is ready as a prototype, and it just needs to be got ready for manufacture, but they haven't built it in a way that will actually support test or availability of components or the battery life that they need. The other thing we see very often is people that have got what we call the snail pace expert. And this again goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Everybody just wants to make it a little bit better, but it's slow to develop. You need a product on the market being used so you can iterate or you can pivot.
Yeah.
Again, biggest problem we see with people developing electronic products is they never quite get there. They just want a little bit more, rather than getting it out there and into the use of people's hands. I already mentioned that you need to build in security. It's not something that you can go back and retrospectively fit once you've delivered it out all around the world. Too many cooks spoil the project. Again, listening to too many people, too many customers, too many experts in the market, decide what you're doing and deliver it. Yeah, then take the feedback, then pivot. It's much better than not actually coming up with a product. And then in electronics, we have lots of laws, Ohm's, Kirchhoff, and all the rest. Our founder came up with this one, which is the Fletcher's law of prototyping. Higher the number of prototypes initially made, the worse the product and those prototypes will be. And that's something that's sort of based on a lot of experience. And that's it.
You could counter that with Dyson. I saw a program him and his Hoover, and he had so many cyclones he'd built. But that's probably because he's doing it empirically as opposed to a design process. But there we go.
Well, they always say the exceptions prove the rule, but certainly, the number of times we see a prototype and then we need to add some more functionality, or we need to make it work in a different territory, so we need to do this, or I've seen something new come out and we can add this. And again, you end up with a product that's never actually on the market.
Yeah. Neil, fantastic. I think there's so many lessons in that about, think about the jurisdictions, think about some of the functionality, don't just race into it, build that value piece,
Yeah.
not the concept. So you can actually, I suppose in some respects, it's like, do you want to build a prototype drill, or do you want to be able to show it putting holes in things, because you can show different holes that it can do? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's that kind of concept, isn't it? The value is I can do all these holes. This is what people want. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So amazing, Neil. Thank you so much for coming along this afternoon. Sorry you had
No
to wait
problem.
until the end, but they've got 5 minutes of me now talking about Patent Box. So
Oh, excellent.
yeah, they'll be dropping off now. If not asleep, they'll be committing Harry Carey at the back end. But there we go. Thank you, Neil. Really, really interesting. Thank you very much. Okay, folks. I'm going to do the probably 4 slides on Patent Box. I'll just get my, here we go. Where's it gone? My mouse is playing up. Share. You've already had enough of my face. Is that sharing?
Not sharing yet, Sam.
Thank you, Joe. There we go. That should be through now.
There we go.
Amazing. Okay, so Patent Box. I think the UK government, on the whole, is doing absolutely the right thing to support entrepreneurship and innovation. They've got the EIS, SEIS, which I've spoken about tax breaks for investors. They've got quite a strong grant program with Innovate UK and other government departments. They've got R&D tax credits. Yes, they're going through a bit of a phase at the moment with HMRC, but they will get that sorted out, and they're still a fantastic way to reward innovation. And then Patent Box is at the back end, and it's there to reward you for commercialization. And most importantly, if you've got a product that you've developed that you've now licensed to somebody else, the revenue you get back as royalty can still be applicable for Patent Box. So it's not just about you still selling your own product, it can be on the back of a licensing deal. So I'm Sam Stevens, I'm one of the directors at TBAT, and this is one of the areas that I cover for the business. So off we go. It's been around for quite a number of years now. In its earliest form, kind of 2012 onwards, it was a lot more straightforward. And then the Europeans got involved and said, oh, it's far too generous. You need to wind it back in a bit. And then it all got very, very complicated. But that's what we're stuck with. But in a nutshell, Patent Box has the capability to reduce your tax on profits from products with patents in them down to 10%, which is amazing. And what a lot of companies need to think about: do I want a patent to protect it from other people in the world using it and copying it, or am I actually only interested at building up the UK market? And hence a patent might be very narrow just in the UK to allow me to get Patent Box. So it's a very different way that some people may choose to look at patenting, and Jag and Greg can talk to you about that. But it is a government incentive, so it's all to do with your accounts and going through what's called your tax computation into the tax form. So it's at the back end of your year. So you've completed your tax year, then you complete your Patent Box piece. It's I've just done a claim for somebody. We're saving them over £30,000 a year, and they've had a patent for 15 years, never claimed. We've just saved them £90,000 over 3 years. So there is some real money there to be saved. Okay, so to be eligible, you do need to have a patent in application. So it needs to have been filed in order for you to look at potentially claiming Patent Box. So filed means it's been written, it's been submitted, and you've got that filing date. And that means that if anybody comes along afterwards with the same product and they try to patent it, you get priority, it's yours. So that's that filing date. There's then anywhere between a year and 3 years for it to get granted, and that's quite important. So it needs to be a patent, and it can be in the UK, the EU. There are other jurisdictions, including Japan and the USA, where that patent can have brought in from. There's this thing called, I've forgotten what it's called now. It's how much of your product relies on that patent. So if your patent is for a new resistor that's extra accurate, and you're putting it into a mobile phone, it probably won't affect the quality of that phone and how it operates fundamentally. So that would not be an allowable use of patent box. If you developed a new touchscreen that was better and you got a patent on it, that is a significant part of the mobile phone. That carries the significance test. You will be able to claim patent box. And the beauty of patent boxes on the profit on the whole of that mobile phone. So Apple sell them, I don't know, for £1,000. That screen might be a £20 component, but it's on the profit of that £1,000 phone, which is what patent box looks at. You may not own the patent, but you have to have exclusive rights to some extent that belong to your company to use that patent in the products that you're developing or putting into the marketplace. And you have to be a UK limited company of some description, i.e. you have to be liable to pay UK corporation tax. I've just covered that minor or major part. It can cover a process. The patent might be a process patent. If that's a fundamental part of the product you sell, then patent box applies there. A lot of companies, certainly SMEs, are not so hot at keeping good records. So if I want to understand from a company, what products did you sell, which ones had the patent bits in it, what was the material cost on all of those added together, how much marketing did you spend on that as opposed to something else, how would you split your administration costs, it can become a bit of a tangle of numbers. The better the record keeping, the easier the patent claim is going to be. Otherwise, there is an awful lot of number crunching. It doesn't stop a claim, it just makes it more tricky. And patent box is only effective when you make profit and it saves you tax. If you make a loss, you don't get money back. It does what in tax terms says it extends your losses. So when next year when you make a load of profit, those losses then get used to save you tax at that point. But you don't get a cash back. You can't cash the benefit in. It gets carried forward. If you make profit, it saves you tax. If you're doing a retrospective claim and you've paid tax, you will get cash back at that point because it's overpaid tax. There's some of the things you should consider. In order to get going, you do need to write a letter to HMRC, which is you electing into patent box. It doesn't just arrive in your tax return, off you go. You have to tell HMRC you're doing a patent box election, and then they can make sure that the systems are set up to process that. You do need that patent, of course, and you do need to have that license. If you've applied for a patent and it's not been granted, in the next year after being filed, you can make a claim, but you don't get the benefit of it. You highlight it that when the patent gets granted, this is what it's worth. So the next year you might have to do the same thing. The third year it might get granted, then you can cascade back those years and you get all that benefit in one go. So it doesn't have to be a granted patent, it has to be filed. If the patent fails and it never gets granted, then there's obviously no claim to make because HMRC's paid you no money up to that stage. Because of the complexity of the calculation now, there is a piece in the legislation called a small claims treatment, and there's some criteria around that. And that does make it easier for kind of companies under 30 to access the patent box regime. Okay, 9 key steps. The HMRC love their steps to complete calculations. So you have to separate, in a nutshell, you separate your income and you have to separate the costs into those. So you should have cost of sales. So how many man hours and what stuff you had to buy in against in each stream of income, patent, non-patent. So that's quite straightforward. That will come up with a percentage. You can then apply that to your overheads, and then we can get a profit at the bottom for patented stuff and non-patented stuff. I've got an example later on. There's this funny odd thing called the routine profit deduction, and you get all that information off your accounts. There's 6 different headings, and it comes up with a number, and that reduces off that profit, saying that had you not done anything else, this is what your profit would be. So it's called your qualifying residual profit. Something to do with your marketing. I'll come on to that in a minute. The Nexus fraction, which they introduced, crazy old names, that's to do with the amount of R&D you're still doing, whether you're doing it here in the UK, whether you're using subcontractors, connected parties, all the rest of it. So that affects it. And then you calculate the actual patent box deduction, and eventually you get to your tax savings. So, yeah, congratulate yourself on the job. Here's a typical one. So this company turned over the best part of 3 million. We worked out their cost of goods sold, which was quite straightforward. Then, because we knew what the split in the turnover was, 72 and 28%, we could apply that to the administration cost ratio to give us our profits. This routine reduction is what we calculate using the data out of your account, so your balance sheet and your profit and loss, as per the legislation. The marketing asset return for this company, because they were small, there's a fixed percentage, so that made it quite easy. The Nexus fraction around R&D, they did all the R&D in-house, didn't use subcontractors, didn't use overseas people, and they owned it all, so that was easy. That was 100% in this situation. And then the saving for them, they £57,000 was the actual savings. So they actually saved from, instead of paying £170,000 of tax, they paid 113. Now, this may seem awfully complicated and you're wanting to just develop a product, but just think, if you patent a product and you end up licensing it, you can tell the licensees you've got a patent and they can apply into patent box. So it's a really, really useful tool. So A, it's protected, and B, they will get benefit of that huge reduction in their corporation tax. Really, really important stuff. So in a nutshell, that is it. Some top tips. We get asked to go into a lot of companies and talk about patent box, and more often than not we do an exercise with them to understand what is the patent, what are the rough sales, and we work out and calculate what an approximate claim might be, and then we work out what would be the cost taking that forward and whether it makes economic sense. And that's really quite an important step. You elect into it if it's all a good idea. Because it's to do with accounts, you can go back 2 full years, which is great. I think that's about it, really. It's a really complicated subject area. Can't do it justice in 5 or 10 minutes. It's really just to give you a few top tips. More than happy to chat to anybody about that. And the beauty is it can be patents that you use in your product, or if you've licensed it and you've got residual income and you still own the patent, then you can still get patent box on the royalties coming in. And that's really, really important. So we're dealing with a company at the moment, and that patent box is going to be really, really useful for the guys who own the IP. They'll have licensed it to somebody. When the royalties come in, they only pay half the corporation tax. That's really important for them. Okay, thank you very much for that piece. So in the last 2 minutes, workshop number 4, commercialization. Please get yourselves booked in for the 26th of June. Some fantastic speakers again. One I'm really delighted to announce is, Mariam's not on there. So Datalink, Mariam, the MD there, she's going to do a 20-minute slot on her story on how she started in the business as a receptionist, and she's ended up doing an MBO in 14 years. And I think that's going to be fantastic to listen to. We've got Shakespeare's again doing some great words. Red Marlin on PR, they always do a great speak. There's some really, really interesting stuff there. So please get yourselves booked on. There's that. So the Innovation Challenge, thank you to all our sponsors once more. We couldn't have done it without them. Thank you all so much for staying on the call. Really hope it's been interesting for you. I've certainly learned a lot, and I do this year in, year out. It's my subject area, but I still think it's absolutely fascinating. Workshop 4 will be equally fascinating, so please book in. There you go. Don't forget the Innovation Challenge. Pre-register now. Go to our website. It's open 26th of June to the 18th of August. 50,000, £60,000 worth of prizes all done. Take part. It's a fantastic opportunity. Tell other companies to take part. There we go. I've finished. And we're only 10 minutes late. So I think that's pretty good. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope to catch you soon. Cheers.